Ricky, Mazda, Saturday, have sauce and all this.
The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with God. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same, in hope, because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption to it, the redemption of our body. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces, like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth.
Ricky, Mazda, Saturday, have sauce and all this.
Right. Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rukakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rukakwadash. Pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Al Shai. All right. What I want to get into, the live stream is how born in the spirit. Okay, how born in the spirit. Okay, because as we've been born again, we've been born and called into a purpose. Okay, the purpose of high born. Okay, and we're going to get into that. It's a term that, we hear, I use it, from time to time, but just to really get into that. And let's go back to how, we're highborn by definition, okay, as Israelites, okay, but we fell from, their status, all right, to slaves. The Lord demoted us from being highborn to being slaves. Okay, here it is, the same power that delivered us from being slaves, all right, and making us highborn. Well, he demoted us back to slavery because of disobedience. Okay, because when we was in Egypt, we were slaves. Okay, but as we came out of Egypt, all right, the Lord made us people that were highborn, born into privilege. Okay, born into authority and rank and power. You see, but as we disobeyed, well, the Lord demoted us, all right, back into slavery, into a new Egypt. You see? So let's go here. Because when you go into look at this, the book of Exodus chapter 4, because what did the Lord call us, when we was in Egypt, even though we was in captivity, all right, we was of that lineage, okay, of the sons of God. All right, Yasha Allah, go that title, that's a title, he Prince of Power. You see, that's a title for Habon. You see, Exodus 4:22 said, then you would tell me, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn. All right, it's my firstborn son. Okay, and the firstborn son will come, with particular privileges, but also responsibility. Okay, and what happened with us, we, all right, fumbled the responsibility that came with being highborn, because it's easy to enjoy the perks. Okay, but the discipline aspect of being highborn, okay, is the responsibility that comes with it. You see, and we'll get into these things now. Let's go here. Let's go back to Genesis 17. All right, when the Lord made Abraham, okay, Isaac and Jacob, he made all of them highborn. You see, now when you go to the book of Genesis 17 and 5, it said, neither shall thy name be called anymore. All right, neither shall thy name anymore be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father, all right, of many nations have I made thee. And you go into this word Abraham, all right, because you're going to get into Abraham. All right, Abraham in the Hebrew, which means what, exalted father. Okay, but then when you go into the name that he was given, all right, which is Abraham, all right, Abraham, which means father of a multitude or chief of a multitude. Okay, father of a multitude, chief of a multitude, because the Lord's going to make, all right, the Lord's going to make a great nation, okay, out of Abraham. Okay, he promised Abraham that his seed will be the sand of the sea and the stars of heaven, which can't be numbered. Okay, and it was going to be a highborn, royal people, a noble people. Okay, that's why when you go here, when you keep reading, it says, I will make thee exceeding fruitful. You see that? And I will make nations of thee, the tribes. Okay, and kings shall come out of thee. So this is the Lord making Abram, all right, turning his name to Abraham, because that's what it do. A king could change, your status at the snap of a finger. Okay, you can put titles on your name at the snap of a finger. Okay, and it will come with perks, but it will also come with responsibility and duty. You see, so this is the Lord promote Abraham, all right, to highborn, which means everything that comes from Abraham of their lineage, okay, through Isaac and through Jacob will be considered highborn. That's why the Lord said, Israel is my firstborn son. Well, that's nobility talk. Okay, and it ain't just because he born first, just some random, this is my, no, it's nobility talk. Okay, firstborn is a rank. All right, and firstborn came with privileges and responsibilities, especially in the highborn family. Okay, so you go, let's go here. Let's see. So even when you go, this is on Genesis 26 and 1, dealing with Isaac. And it says, and there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. It says, sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and I will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed, all right, singular, and that seed will be Jacob, I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear until Abraham thy father. So this is the Lord, promising an inheritance, all right, to Isaac, which is the inheritance that was given to Abraham. With Abraham, he received everything, man. Okay, he was considered what, a friend of the Most High. Means he got everything. To be friend status with the Most High. You see, to be heir, to be heir of the blessing and promises. Okay, so he's establishing that with Isaac. It says, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, man. Going into the tribes, because each tribe is like a nation within itself. Because you look at our people, all right, the tribes today, okay, which we fully believe in a 12 tribe chart, and that's not, that doesn't mean that there's not Israelites dwelling outside of those different countries, but there's a high concentration of Israelites in these certain lands over here in the Western Hemisphere, and you see they all operate as a country unto themselves. Brazil, okay, Venezuela, you see Argentina. Now we know that Esau runs those governments, okay, but just as the people themselves, how they operate like all these different individual nations, but they're one seed, they're one lineage, they're one people, Israelites. Okay, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Haiti, you see Mexico, Panama, and you go on and on, but they operate like what? Like individual nations. Each tribe can hold their own as a nation. Okay, but together we make up the 12 tribes and the children of promise. You see, it says, so let's go from there. Let's go to same book, Genesis 35. Okay, so he's the Lord. He dealt with Abraham. He dealt with Isaac. Okay, according to this promise, according to inheritance. Okay, then inheritance. Okay, of being highborn, being that noble people. You see, so when you go into Genesis 35 and 9, it says, and the Most High appeared unto Jacob again when he came out of Padanaram and blessed him. Most High said unto him, thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called anymore Jacob, but Israel. You see that? A name change. Why? Because this was a promotion. You see? He was promoting, his status, okay, in the earth. You see? But Israel shall be thy name, and he called his name Israel, Yasha'Allah, he Prince of the Power. Okay? Because even you go to Jacob, which is supplanter, which he supplanted, okay, the blessing from Esau, but Jacob just supplanted what was already his. Okay? Because the Lord didn't, there was no time when the Lord scolded Jacob for getting the birthright from Esau. Okay? If anything, he doubled down on. We're going to show you. It says, I am the Most High Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. Okay? And kings shall come out of thy loins. So if kings are coming out of your loins, it means you're highborn. You see? And that's why even now, Brothers, hey, just meant to go into everything. You see, there's not a king seat, and we will awaken to that understanding because you're gonna have whole families that's gonna be delivered. Men, with their wives and children. Okay, and everyone's gonna be upgraded to what? To highborn. All right, it's the children that's certain children that brothers are having. Well, those children are going to be princes and princesses when they're changed. Okay, I say so. We ain't just got no normal seed. Just putting it out there, especially in these times, man. Be mindful. Okay, because like I said, we don't just have normal seed. This ain't just okay, just to pass around. Okay, on random Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Nah, man. Be mindful. You see. It says, be fruitful and multiply, nation and the company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. Now, just to show you again that birthright was always meant for Jacob, because this is Genesis 28:3 says, and the Most High Almighty bless thee, okay, and make thee fruitful. Okay, this is Isaac. All right, speaking unto Jacob. Okay, doubling down on their blessing. It says, and the Most High Almighty bless thee and make thee fruitful and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and giving thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed. Okay, the seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which the Most High gave unto Abraham. Okay, so there's a particular promise and the blessing, all right, and the inheritance that just follows this seed. Okay, even through captivity, this seed, okay, is still blessed of the Lord. Okay, and that's why at the end of this captivity, we've been awakened. Okay, and informed of who we are, who our power is. Okay, understanding that the birthright and blessings, okay, that's attached to this lineage, this seed. Okay, so when you go to, that's why the Bible always mentions with Abraham, Isaac, okay, Jacob. Let's go look at this in Psalms, then we'll get this definition, okay, of highborn. Let's get this in the book of Psalms, chapter 105. It's the book of Psalms, chapter 105, 6 through 8. It says, Psalms 105, all right, chapter 6. It says, O ye seed of Abraham, his servant, ye children of Jacob, his chosen. He is the Lord our power. His judgments are in all the earth. He hath remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations. Okay, so it says, what? Oh, you seed of Abraham, going back to a lineage, ye children of Jacob, his chosen. Okay, a chosen people, it's a chosen lineage. Okay, and it says, which covenant he made with Abraham and his oath with Isaac, the same lineage, constantly calling out the same lineage all throughout the scriptures, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. Okay, and to Israel for what? An everlasting covenant. You see? So there's no undoing, all right, the Lord's covenant with his people. Okay? And the Yahushua, this second covenant, is an upgrade of the first, in which we're going to be upgraded. Okay? So we'll never be degenerate again. You see? We'll never fall away. We'll never be disobedient. We'll never be in bad standings with our power. We'll never be demoted, okay, to slavery again. All right? When we're delivered from this captivity, and placed in, our rightful positions, all right, as rulers of the earth, man. Okay, in righteousness, man. You see, but the Lord is refining us to be those righteous rulers. Okay, to rule with balance, okay, and righteousness, man. Now, when you go into the term highborn, all right, so let's deal with this term highborn. It said highborn means being born into a family of a high social status, typically nobility of the aristocracy. It emphasizes inherited rank, privilege, and pedigree over personal wealth. Okay, so the Israel is a particular pedigree. Okay, and by default, there's a certain rank. Okay, that we inherit, and that's the status of the sons of God. You see, we haven't. See, we're just getting the inkling. Okay, of the status that comes with being the sons of God. We're having this truth. We inherited this truth because that's another, thing that we inherit. There's something else that we inherited, Israelites, is this truth, is this word. It's an inheritance that's exclusive to the nation of Israel. Okay, to the family of Israel. You see, these other nations don't got it. Okay? He said it emphasizes inherited rank, privilege, and pedigree over personal wealth. And it says, it is often a formal, often literary term used to describe people, lineage, and specific, all right, character, your archetypes. A highborn lady was Israel. We're that highborn lady, because a highborn lady would be born into wealth. She would be born into status. She would be born, being pampered. And that's what the Lord did to us. Okay? But what? We got proud. Now, real quick, because we're going to go into highborn, being likened. The Lord is going to liken us into like being a highborn lady. All right? Let's see. What happened to my I had asked a question. Oh, here you go. So I asked her what are the perks and responsibilities of being the firstborn of a highborn family, which we know Yahushua is the firstborn of the nation of Israel. Okay, and the nation of Israel as a whole is likened to the firstborn. That's why Heavenly Father calls us his firstborn in Exodus 4:22. It said historically being the firstborn, particularly the firstborn son of a highborn family, meant living under a rigid legal and cultural system. Okay, then we get the law. Okay, a system called primogeniture. All right, primogeniture. So when you go into primogeniture, okay, all right. So there was a system set up. Okay, especially going to all right the Middle Ages. All right, so primogeniture. All right, is the right by law or custom of the firstborn legitimate child to inherit all or most of their parents' estates, as well as succeed their parents as the ruler, all right, of a state. Okay, and we know as a Yahushua, he's been given everything as their firstborn. Okay, and Yahushua is going to split the inheritance amongst us. But him being the firstborn, he has the biggest portion, which comes with the biggest responsibility as well. Okay, we're going to get into some aspects of that. It says, primogeniture stands in contrast to shared inheritance among all or some children. An illegitimate child or any collateral relative, in most texts, it means that the inheritance of the firstborn son, all right, it can also mean by the firstborn, that goes into But just going to primogeniture. Now, when you keep reading on, and then we're gonna get some precept. It says historically, being the firstborn, particularly the firstborn son of a highborn family, meant living under a rigid legal or cultural system. So it had the law. Okay, as a people. This system was designed to keep family wealth, land, and power. All right. Now we have laws dealing with wealth, inheritance, land, power. You see, entirely intact rather than splitting it up. Even when we married, women of the nation, they was lesser wives. Okay, they didn't have the privileges of the Israelite woman. Okay, they was lesser wives. You see, inherently intact rather than splitting it up among multiple siblings. While it came with massive life-altering privileges, it also demanded intense personal and political sacrifices. The firstborn was the crown jewel of the family lineage, inheriting nearly everything by default. Under strict primogeniture laws, the eldest son inherited the entire undivided estate. Now, as a nation, we're going to inherit the entire, all right, state of the world. You see, the earth is going to be our inheritance. People in the earth are going to be our inheritance, man. Okay, we're not going to divide that amongst these heathens. And Yahweh Shah being the firstborn, he's going to get, okay, the double portion of everything, even the spirit of the Heavenly Father. Okay, Yahweh Shah is going to have a larger portion of the spirit of the Heavenly Father than everyone else. Okay, as he is the firstborn. All right, but we're the firstborn nation, and the inheritance is going to be, all right, divided, okay, by the firstborn Yahweh Shah amongst, okay, the rest of the nation. It says including castles, lands, and family wealth. Now, like I said, they had, it go off for how we're going to do it. They had they think where the younger siblings were often left to fend for themselves by joining the military or the church. But, just the point, just getting that concept of what it means to be highborn, firstborn, okay, the perks, the responsibilities that come with that. Okay. Now, let's go here and show you how the Lord took care of us like a woman that was born. Okay, that was highborn. When you go to Ezekiel, okay, 16. Right, Ezekiel 16 and 9. It says, this is the NLT. Okay, this is the Lord taking us out of captivity, pretty much cleaning us up. Okay, taking us out of Egypt and cleaning us up, man. Okay, remember we went from slaves, right, to being highborn. Okay, and then we'll go from highborn to being slaves for disobedience. It says, then I bathed you and washed off your blood, and I rubbed fragrant oils into your skin. I gave you expensive clothing of fine linen. So he's talking to Israel as if a king decking out, a woman that he chose. Because these niggas talking about, oh, I can change your life. These niggas got these songs. You tricking out the Eve, oh, I can change your life. Well, a king, all right, especially a wealthy king, could change a woman's life for generations. You see, for generations to come. You see, it's on a whole nother level. Okay, and the Heavenly Father, he dealt with us on a whole nother level. It said, I gave you expensive clothing of fine linen and silk, all right, beautifully embroidered, all right, embroidered and sandals made of fine goat skin leather, the best of the best. I gave you lovely jewelry, bracelets, beautiful necklaces, a ring for your nose, earrings for your ears, and a lovely crown for your head, decking us out, man. And so you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were made of uh, a fine linen and costly fabric, and were beautifully embroidered. You ate the finest foods, choice flour, honey, and olive oil, and became more beautiful than ever. You looked like a queen, and so you were. Well, which NLT put the word queen in there. See what it says in the KJV. All right, we didn't deal with queens. Those are political office of the heathen for the women that were married to kings. All right, which put women in, affairs of the government, which we didn't do that. Okay. And it says, yeah, thou was decked with gold and silver, and thy raiment was of fine linen and broidered work. Thou didst eat fine flour and honey and oil, and thou was exceedingly beautiful, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom. See, we prospered into a kingdom. Okay. We ate the best, clothed in the best. Okay. Decked out with the accessories. Because even when you go here, because it talked about how we ate fine flour. Well, let's get some history. Okay, First Kings 4 and 20 says, Judah and Israel were many as the sand which is by the sea, and multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. Eating and drinking and making merry. You see, we was good. Okay, our nation was on top. Okay, we was the top government in the earth at this time. We was a noble people, and our children was born into this status. Okay, it says Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. Yeah, our king. Okay, at this time, King Solomon, he was the King of Kings and Lord of the Lords. You see, so his people were born into their privilege of his status. Okay, they came with perks, but they came with responsibilities, and that's what we feel. Okay, and it says 10 fat oxen. Okay, and it says, and Solomon's provision for one day was 30 measures of fine flour. You see that? And 3 score measures of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 oxen out of the pastures. Okay, and 100 sheep beside harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowl. So like not owl, not owl, fatted fowl. Talking about chicken, right? And it says and he had dominion over all the region of this side, the river from Tipsah even to Azah, over all the kings of the side on this side of the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. Okay, so King Solomon had the status of what King of Kings and Lord of Lords. All right, we know King Solomon is Yahushua. He's coming back to establish that status in the earth again. Okay, with a higher glory. Because King Solomon wasn't immortal, but Yahushua coming back as perfect immortal. Okay, as a God. Verse 25, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of King Solomon, which means every family had their own substance, had their own estates. Okay, of course, you always had some that had more than others, but every Israelite family had their own estates, which means they had inheritance to pass down. Which was like a bunch of mini kingdoms within, all right, the kingdom of King Solomon. Okay, and that's the status that we enjoyed in the earth. And even when you go to, I believe that's 1 Kings 10, because the Lord talk about how he decked us out with silver and gold. These things are literal. He's using an allegory of Israel, all right, being likened to a woman, okay, but the the wealth and the perks, the goals, and us being doing well, they was literal, okay. Um, it goes into this is First Kings 10. You read this whole chapter, kind of tap in, the wealth that was coming into Jerusalem. It said First Kings 10:27 says, and the king made silver to be in Jerusalem and stones. He made silver and stones. That's the abundance of silver. It was common as stones. Okay, showing that the economy was just jumping like Zion, man. It says, and cedars made he to be as a sycamore tree, which is cedar is a very expensive tree. Okay, it's a coveted tree. It has a lot of benefits. It's great for building. Okay, so it's known as a hardwood. Okay, it has a smell, it has a scent. It even deters moth. People with little money, they have cedar closets to this day. Okay, it says, and cedars made he to be as a sycamore tree that are in the vale, all right, for abundance. Okay, so when the Lord is speaking about how he decked us out, man, these things, we literally had these things, man. Okay, going back to Ezekiel 16:13, I started at 12. It says, and I put a jewel on thy forehead, just like in a diadem. Okay, because you will have diadems, but if you had diadems, which was like turbans, certain head wraps. Okay, and you had jewels in your diadem that represented royalty, all right, nobility. It says, and earrings in thy ears, and a beautiful crown upon thy head. It said, thus was thou decked with gold and silver. You see that? And thy raiment was of fine linen and silk and bordered work. Thou didst eat fine flour. Okay, you see King Solomon's provisions. And then it said, what Israel ate and drank and were merry every day. And honey and oil, and thou wast exceeding beautiful, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom. You see, and thou didst prosper into a kingdom. Okay, because what we were highborn. You see, but what happened? Okay, even the Lord, he asked the question. Okay, Jeremiah 2:21 said, yet I planted thee a noble vine, holy and right seed. How then art thou turned into a degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? Okay, it's because we were curious of the heathen. We was intrigued by the way of the heathen. Okay, and it was like a woman born, all right, a high status, all right, and going and playing the hope, going and playing the harlot. That's what we did spiritually. Okay, and we got demoted to slaves. Here it is. The Lord had us set up as highborn, and we was, curious of low culture, the culture of the heathen. Okay, we had a high culture. See, now as we are remembering ourselves, we're remembering, how good we had. Okay, and the Lord has given us all the low culture we want here in America, man. Okay, low culture is glorified. Okay, but as we awaken to who we are, man, we awaken to a high purpose. Okay, that's why Howard Shah made this statement. This is the book of St. John 3:1. This is St. John 3:1. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. So he was a man of status. amongst Israel. It says the same came to Yahushua by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from the Most High, for no man can do these miracles except thou doest, except the Most High be with him. Okay? You see, so you have Nicodemus, he's a secret disciple. Okay? So he's coming to inquire of Yahushua in secret. It says, Yahushua answered and said to him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of the Most High. And see, when we're born again, we become high born again. Now, we don't have the perks and the privileges to come, okay, we're high born in this system, but in the spirit we do, and the perks are the riches of this wisdom. You see, we have the riches of this wisdom that this world can't inherit. Only Israel can inherit that. Okay? Only Israel, only the elect of Israel in this time get to inherit faith and wisdom, which is going to be far more valuable than the wealth of this world in the time of judgment, man. Okay? So we have to be born again, right? When you read it, it said Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? Simple. Okay? Simple, man. I know Yahushua put his forehead in his hand. Nigga, no. Okay. John 3:5 says, Yahushua answered, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of the Most High. Okay, we're born by water, okay, through this word. You see, even when you go to Ezekiel, matter of fact, what does it say in Ezekiel? When the Lord, chose us out of Egypt. All right, well, what was one of the first things he mentioned? Okay, yep. Ezekiel 16:9. Then wash I thee with water. You see? Because a woman, a high-born woman, she will bathe. She will be extremely thoroughly bathed. Okay? She ain't just come, jump in the king's. No. Thoroughly bathed. Okay? Before she will come and be with the king. Okay? He said, yeah, I thoroughly washed away thy blood from thee, and I anointed thee with oil, and all that goes into what? In the word, this word in the spirit. Okay, so we're bathing in this word and soaking in the oils of this understanding, man. Being prepped like a high-born woman will be prepped. Okay, the blood, which is the filth. Okay, the filth of this world is being washed from us, what? Through this word. Okay, and I anointed thee with oil. You see? So we've been anointed with the oil of this understanding. All right. So you go to St. John. It's the book of St. John, chapter 3, and verse 5. It says, Yahushua answered, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water, you see that, and of the Spirit, which is like unto oil, he cannot enter into the kingdom of the Most High. Okay? So we're born of the Spirit, and see, when we're born of the Spirit, okay, when we're a product of the Spirit, then we tapping back into what? Being highborn. Okay? Chosen. You see, and see, like I said, we don't have the perks of being highborn, but we do have the responsibility. We do have to have the discipline of someone of highborn, of a higher status. There's another thing, being of a noble seed and high status, it came with responsibility, heavy responsibility. Okay, it wasn't just no light thing, something to be glossed over like, or you didn't come up because you was over so much, you had to have great discipline. Okay, even inheriting great wealth, you have to have great discipline not to destroy yourself with wealth. So people of high born of nobility, they will be tutored with discipline and instructions, all right, from their youth up. Okay? And why even scripture speak about how the law was a schoolmaster. You know, a schoolmaster was like a rigid, okay, teacher, okay, that would be with, all right, and mentor, okay, the noble children, the children of high-born families, where they would have schoolmasters that would instill the discipline and the family principles, okay, the history, the morality, okay, the culture, the etiquette. You see, those things will be instilled by what you call a schoolmaster for well-to-do families, man. You know, and that's what that law was to us. It was like a schoolmaster. You see, teaching us the ways of, you know, the family, the father. Okay, and as we, you know, rehearse the righteous acts, we're rehearsing for nobility, man. Okay, because now we'll understand the responsibility that comes with it. And that's ultimately what the Lord wanted us to understand from the beginning is the responsibility of being highborn. You know, because it's easy to enjoy the perks. Okay, but it takes discipline. Okay, to understand and to embrace the responsibility of, you see, and we're, you know, highborn in the spirit as we've been awakened to the truth, man. Okay, so that's the point. I'll leave it there. You know, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and if you sisters edified once again, I'm gonna give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem, Kapadash, double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to his younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutations to the whole of Shalom.